Hi everyone, I'm Shane Stevenson, Director of Museum Collections and Curator here at the Buffalo Naval Park. And for today's video, we're going to be, we're kind of in the dead of winter now, and so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the snow on the decks of the USS The Sullivans. Right, here she is here. You can see in the water, our Buffalo River is beginning to ice over. We had some pretty cool days earlier this week. Then we had one semi-warm day where it got up to about 38, 39 degrees. And we're right back at it today at 15 degrees. And so that ice that broke apart yesterday is beginning to slowly reform. And I've heard some cracking and things like that as you walk around. But we are going to go up to the main deck there on the Sullivans. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the snow on the deck and why we're not really worried about it. So why don't you follow me? Well, here I am standing on the starboard side, midships of the Sullivans, looking aft. And as you can see, there's a lot of snow piled up here. All right, so we had our caretakers, Brendan, caretaker of the Little Rock, and you know him, Tomato Pie, Andrew Biondo, caretaker of the Sullivans, shoveling. And as you can see, we've got some piles of snow here. This is, comes up to about my waist right here. So that's a lot of snow. And doing a little research, there are actual websites out there that you can weigh the snow depending on the square footage of a space. So what I did was I took the length of the Sullivans, 376 feet. I tried to average out the beam. The widest part is about 39, 40 feet on the Sullivans in a Fletcher class destroyer. So you average that out over the whole ship. I kind of came up with about 13, 14 feet. So the square footage then is 376 times 13 or 14. And then you can actually weigh the snow based on what you think the depth of the snow is. So I put it, again, before anyone shoveled, it seemed to be about a foot on every square foot of the deck of the Sullivans. And that came out to anywhere from 71,000 pounds up to about 105,000 pounds of snow on the main deck itself. All right, so that's a lot of snow. That's a lot of weight. Oh, gotta be careful here. There we go, going for a little ride. There. Back into the non-skid. So, that doesn't really, when I first started here, that really seemed to concern me. Like all this weight sitting on the ship for, say, a month and a half, potentially. But then doing a little research, I said, you know what, I'm not worried about it because of the STS steel that is on the Sullivans itself. So this video is going to kind of morph in from that interesting stat of 71,000 to 105,000 pounds on the main deck to talking a little bit about, there we go, talking a little bit about STS and HTS steel that was used on ships. Even to this day, it's a different alloy, it's a different composite of steel, but it's still very similar. So I'll come back and I'll give you a little update on STS and HTS. So STS and HTS, that stands for Special Treatment Steel and High Tensile Steel. All right, and those were developed in the 1910s, around 1914, 1915, 1916. And prior ship construction used just traditional steel. What does that mean? To tell you the truth, I have no idea. Even though I did work in a steel plant for a couple of summers in college, I don't remember that process very well. So traditional steel was used in ship construction starting in 1915, 1916 when STS and HTS were being developed. What those turned into was an alloy steel with carbon, nickel, and chromium. All right, those are, and they were inserted in a higher ratio into the steel making process and the steel milling itself. So what they found was that it offered better protection on ships than traditional steel for shell fragments and ricocheting fragments that would be seen throughout when there was an impact. All right, so when a shell impacted a ship, of course there's ricocheting, there's impacts and fragments flying everywhere. They found this STS steel and HTS steel was better equipped to handle those impact fragments. Another positive development was that it could be used structurally. All right, so it could be used, it just wasn't a piece of armor. It could actually be used to form different parts of the ship. The superstructure if needed, certainly the gun mounts, say on the Sullivans or other Fletcher classes. So it was able to be used in a structural sort of way, housing compartments and spaces. So here you can see, again, this is an untouched area of the Sullivans. That's probably, if you average it out, probably about a foot, which again gets us to that 71,000 to 105,000 pounds on the deck. But STS and HTS also offered a higher yield threshold and a higher ultimate strength threshold. So what the yield threshold means is that steel can deform, and then it can pop back into place. So STS and HTS offered a higher threshold for that yielding, which means that it could be twisted and bent, and the higher threshold is it will pop back into place. For the ultimate strength threshold, it just meant that it had a higher rate before it snapped and broke completely, totally degrading the steel. So these were able to bend and move a little bit at a higher threshold and then kind of pop back into place, or just the strength that it took to break it and destroy that integrity of the steel was higher. All right, again, all very important on warships. And a good example, potentially, of that is of the yield strength, the higher yield strength, is we dream for the days of the sun in summer. But as the sun comes out, the weather starts to change, spring, the birds, the bees, all of that stuff. What we find is that you'll hear popping on the main deck here. And there's one spot right here, just forward of Mount 55, which is right next to me here. And staff and visitors will be walking along, and all of a sudden it pops. All right, like that board game Sorry, I think, with the, it has that bubble blink, and it rolls the dice for you. So it has that sort of effect where it will, just because now the sun's hitting it, it's expanding a little bit, and so it's been distorted throughout the winter, and now it's popping back into place. All right, what I was talking about with that yield strength. So that's a great spot right here on the main deck, right around where my hand is. All right, blink, it pops back into place. Now these could also be used on the interior decks. All right, and that will lead me to the framing, all right, the longitudinal frames and the transverse frames. All right, USS The Sullivans and Fletcher classes had longitudinal frames, 14 longitudinal frames, and those would run from the keel along up to the shear line or the main deck. So in addition to the longitudinal frames, we also had the transverse frames, all right, which were like the ribs of the ship coming up from the keel and not running longitudinally or horizontally with the decking and the platforms, but now cutting across on a perpendicular level. All right, there are 210 of those frames, and when you come down, you can see the frame markers on the main deck, All right, like you've seen if you've watched the Johnston video, you can see that, the comparison video with the USS Johnston. All right, and of those 210 frames, most were of web design, which means they came out a few feet and they just stopped. They could have had baffles in them or lightning holes. All right, but there were 14 watertight transverse frames, and there were 7 oil-tight transverse frames as well to keep those liquids in their proper compartments or storage tanks, things like that. So you had 14 longitudinal frames coming up from the keel, all right, STS or HTS, and then you also had the transverse frames running perpendicular at a 90-degree angle to the platforms and decks. And again, that's the structural steel that we were talking about with the STS and the HTS. There is also the plating on the sides called strakes. So if you start at the keel, which was 21 inches by 8 inches, obviously running the whole length of the ship, that was covered by the garboard. Now the garboard was this STS or HTS that kind of protected the keel, and moving up again to the main deck or the shear line, you had 7 other plates that formed the hull during construction. And those were also HTS, high tensile steel, and special treatment steel all the way up. So if you like this video, which I hope you do, you know, it's pretty chilly out here. It's about 14 degrees now, so I got to get back inside. But if you like this video, please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Check out the other videos in our channel, and as always, we appreciate your support. And thanks so much.